One of the best parts about Superflex is that other positions get pushed down the board, so you can end up with a couple of absolute studs you wouldn't normally be able to get in standard 1 QB leagues. Downside is, if you pass on QBs, it's a gamble that can crater your season. I'm going to talk through all these different strategies in this 12-team, 3-wide receiver, half PPR mock draft. Let's randomize the draft position. Ended up with the 7th pick, and let's get this started. First 6 picks off the board: Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jamar Chase, Jalen Hurts, and Justin Jefferson. Now, this being a 12-team league, it is paramount to attack the quarterback position early, just because there's going to be 24 quarterbacks that are starting each and every week, and each team can't necessarily hold 3 active quarterbacks on their roster. So you want to make sure you push those guys up. Now, typically for me, I would be looking at CeeDee Lamb here if this was a 10-team league, but the fact that it is a 12-team league, I am going to go ahead and lock up my top quarterback option. And this actually worked out well for me because I do have Joe Burrow as my QB4. I know a lot of people have Jalen Hurts as their QB4. Can't knock that whatsoever. He's been fantastic. He survived the tush push vote, which was definitely good for him. Maybe not so much for Saquon's potential insane ceiling, but Joe Burrow is just an awesome quarterback. They retained both of their wide receivers. Their defense is probably still going to be very bad. They're probably going to be in a ton of shootouts. Wow. So we see a big run at wide receiver and running back. So Neighbors is gone. CeeDee Lamb is gone. Amon-Ra, Puka, but then Bijan, Saquon, Gibbs, Genty, and Christian McCaffrey. That is a little bit surprising. I will say in 12-team leagues, I would expect to see maybe 1 or 2 more go, but I can understand if people have a tier break between Mahomes and, Baker, Kyler, however they have those guys ranked. Now, Mahomes has been a disappointment as a fantasy quarterback the last couple seasons, but, there's no doubting his potential upside and ceiling. But for me, this pick is pretty easy and obvious. As much as I love Nico Collins, the pick here is Brian Thomas Jr. I have BTJ is my number 6 wide receiver. Nico, I have number 7, but BTJ, we saw him be the wide receiver 4 last year. Just incredible breakout performance. And that was half of his games being played with Mac Jones. And that was also only on 87 catches. And now this year they bring in Liam Cohen, who we've just saw orchestrate an incredible offense for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They brought in Travis Hunter to work alongside him, which I think is going to be fantastic. And I think it's going to be fantastic for Trevor Lawrence. Now, even though I'm not the biggest Trevor Lawrence fan, I think this is kind of just definitely going to be his best opportunity to succeed. And surprisingly enough, the Jags have 212 vacated targets, which is the 4th most in the NFL. And this should be a heavily concentrated offense that's designed much better under Liam Cohen. I really think BTJ has number 1 wide receiver overall upside. So a player that I'm incredibly excited about for this year. Now we see a big run at quarterbacks. Look at that. That is incredible. The only 2 wide receivers that go off the board are Nico Collins, Drake London, and then we see Derrick Henry and Devon Achane go. So at the quarterback position, we still have a lot of good options left here, right? We've got Justin Herbert, we've got Caleb Williams, Dak Prescott, CJ Stroud. So it does start to thin out a little bit, or quite a bit actually, after that. So, it's as tempted as I am to go AJ Brown here because it is a 3 wide receiver format. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock in my second quarterback. Pick 8 has no quarterbacks. Pick 9 has no quarterbacks. 10 has no quarterbacks. 11 has no quarterbacks. Team 12 has just 1 quarterback. So I would expect to see, at least in a real draft, like 4 or 5 more go in that range. So I'm not going to take that risk as much as I like some of the other skill position players. And I'm going to lock in Caleb Williams here. Now, Caleb Williams, I understand his ECR might not be quite as high, and I might be a little bit over consensus with him. I do have him as my QB8, but for me, coming off a season where he was QB 16, we saw the boom weeks. We know that the ceiling is there. He was the consensus number 1 quarterback prospect, in a historic quarterback class. And the offensive ecosystem in terms of coaching around him last year was just atrocious. Shane Waldron, Matt Eberflus, as bad as it gets. So this is really a bet on the talent of Caleb Williams, but more importantly, or just as importantly, a bet on Ben Johnson. They also added Luther Burden. They also added Colston Loveland to an offense that already includes DJ Moore and Rome Dunze. Now, I don't think Chicago is going to have the luxury that Detroit had of an incredible run game just because they don't have the players in Monty and Gibbs. They probably will end up bringing somebody in, maybe a Nick Chubb, maybe a J.K. Dobbins, and then they'll have, Swift kind of as the second fiddle catching passes as well. But they also addressed the offensive line in the offseason through free agency. So with Caleb, we saw him rush for almost 500 yards. We didn't see any rushing touchdowns. So, my kind of bold prediction is he gets to like 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns, which I think is easily in his range of outcomes. We saw 27 rush touchdowns from him while he was in college. So he's kind of one of my plant my flag players for this year. And it's nice because when I have Caleb Williams, there's a little bit less risk when he's my QB2, when I already have such an established player like Joe Burrow. We see 3 quarterbacks go off the board, which is kind of as expected. I would have thought to see 1 or 2 more. At the wide receiver position, unfortunately, Ladd just misses making it back to me. But there is another player that I like here. I actually have him as my wide receiver 12, 1 spot behind Lag McConkey, and that's Tee Higgins. And historically, I've not necessarily been a big Tee Higgins guy. And so maybe not, I love the player, don't get me wrong. Like just really in fantasy, because my biggest issue with him has always been health. Like he missed 5 games last year. He missed 5 games the year prior, but he was the wide receiver 4 in points per game. He got his extension. And as much as I don't typically like to stack in redraft, especially stacking with my first round pick, it's tough to pass on that upside, man, with Burrow and Higgins. I don't know. And I'm kind of fading Tyreek. Evans makes me a little worried. Like there's a lot of question marks here, and there's question marks with a lot of these guys, right? But for Tee Higgins, this is just too fun of a start to pass up on. So that's why we mock draft. I'll take a look at how this team ends out, finishes up, see if I like that stack. But let's go Higgins here. So we see a big run on wide receivers, a decent run at the running back position, and no more quarterbacks go off the board. That's kind of my biggest gripe with Fantasy Pros, and Sleeper does this too in Superflex mocks where like nobody takes a third quarterback. I don't know why that is. It doesn't seem like that difficult of a thing to fix. So maybe I'll reach out to their support and just ask why. Anytime I've reached out to Sleeper support, they respond really quickly with things like that, but then they're like, oh no, there's no actual problem here. There's nothing going on with anything. Everything's perfect. I'm like, okay, whatever, if you say so. It's your platform. But looking at the running back position, I don't have any running backs. I've got 2 wide receivers that I feel confident about. This is a 3 wide receiver league, so I do like to typically load up early, and especially in Superflex, I typically wait at running back. But let me check my rankings here. A couple guys that are interesting: Joe Mixon, Kenneth Walker, DJ Moore. I'm a little bit worried about, and I'm not going to do the double stack with Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Joe Burrow, Tee Higgins. That's way too much risk. One is probably enough. There was a year, I guess it would have been 2 years ago, where I had stacked Lamar with Zay Flowers, and then I stacked Tua with Jalen Waddle, and it was fun when like it worked, but it was just too stressful. And that was in my home league, and I don't know. I made the playoffs. I don't remember where I finished in the playoffs, but I definitely didn't win it. Oh, I remember. I scored the most points, but I was in the consolation match. The 2 teams in the finals just they didn't stink. Their team just stunk that week. But I digress. So let me check my running back rankings here, and it's between Joe Mixon and Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker, I have 16. Joe Mixon, I have 15. Dang it, that's annoying because I like Kenneth Walker so much more as a player. But Joe Mixon, he's been doing it year over year pretty consistently, and with Mixon, we've seen his ability to score in bunches and kind of take over games. And, the only piece that they added to the backfield was Woody Marks in the 4th round. And I like Woody Marks. I'm a USC fan, but he's more of like a Rachaad White type passing game running back. Like he's not super efficient on the ground or super good on the ground, but he is really good in the passing game. So I think, he'll get worked in that way. I know Mixon does catch passes, not a ton. But I think that'll kind of keep Mixon fresh as well. So I will go with Mixon here. I don't want to get completely shut out at this tier of running back. Oh, Kenneth Walker almost made it back to me. Oh, that would have been awesome. Dang it. Okay. Well, that makes this pick pretty obvious. So I'm not, I don't know. Marvin Harrison Jr. was such a disappointment last year. But when I'm looking at what's behind him, Zay Flowers, Cortland Sutton, like I definitely have Marv higher than him. I I think there's a good chance I end up moving Marvin Harrison down, but I will say, like, we're only a year removed from him being the consensus number one in a historic wide receiver class. Everyone was comparing him to Julio Jones, AJ Green. Like, I just I just kind of refuse to believe that the Cardinals are going to stick with the exact same game plan they had for Marv. He's just kind of on the boundary, on the line of scrimmage, like see if he can win that way, and that will lead to some long touchdowns, etc. But it's not very consistent, and it's not really where Kyler thrives. Now I know McBride owns the middle of the field, and I love Trey McBride, but I just have to believe that they get him involved at least in some more like crossing routes, and he's kind of bulking up. And I don't know why he looked a lot slower this year than he did at college, but I think there's an opportunity for him to, break out in a way that's not like, I'm not saying like he's going to finish top 10, but I think top 15 is in his range of outcomes. So I will take him here. Again, 3 wide receiver. It's a little bit easier to find some running back value late than it is wide receiver. All right, this pick's pretty easy. TreVeyon Henderson. He's my number 20 running back. Talked about him a lot during the offseason. We did a bunch of rookie mock drafts. He's a player that I've really, really loved since his freshman year at Ohio State. I think he's just has the opportunity to be one of the top 10 running backs in the NFL. And he's got all the traits. He's electric. He's fast. He's great in pass protection. He doesn't fumble the ball. He's great catching the ball. He's on an ascending offense, hopefully. He's got Ramondre in front of him. And I think Ramondre will still take some of the goal line work, but Ramondre also got benched last year, and this is a new regime. And why did Ramondre get benched? Because he was not good, but more importantly, because he was fumbling. He fumbled 6 times last year, and I will say it again, and I will say it every day. TreVeyon Henderson did not have 1 fumble in 4 years of college football. And if you look at his statistics, he was at 7.6 yards per touch, which was number 1 in the class. 15% of his runs were of 15 yards or more, number 1 in the class. So I just think he's an awesome player. Now, I will say he's not going to be a workhorse. That's not what he profiles best at. Anyway, we saw him at Ohio State this last year kind of be more in like the Jahmyr Gibbs type role, where Quinshon Judkins was kind of more the power-ish back. I don't think he's going to be like the scat back or whatever that maybe people are a little bit afraid of. I think he's going to get more runway. So I understand if you're a little bit nervous just in terms of touches, but for me, he's just a player that I absolutely love. And when I look at the other players, it's like DeAndre Swift, I don't really like that much. Tony Pollard is like fine, but for me, like much later. Chris Olave, like that's the other direction I would go in too, because I do love Chris Olave, and maybe he makes it back to me. We'll see. Because I have 3 wide receivers already, I want to lock in my second running back. Dang it. So Chris Olave did go off the board. So looking at the tight end position, that's interesting. Sam LaPorta and TJ Hawkinson are both available. I like both those guys, but is it worth gambling because team 2 and team 3 have tight ends? So there's 4 teams without a tight end, and there's 8 picks between me. So I would imagine that at least 1, possibly 2 tight ends get selected. Now, I'm not necessarily married to either of those guys. The reason being is David Njoku's ECR on FantasyPros is tight end 10. And I think if Flacco is going to be the starter, like we saw a couple years ago what that connection was. Like he went off with Flacco. So I might just wait and kind of use him as a target because, I still have Jordan Addison here available to me. And I know Jordan Addison is more boom bust, and I definitely prefer him in a best ball format. But this is kind of 2 years in a row where he's had pretty identical stats, right? Like his only downside is, he doesn't catch a ton of passes. Obviously, they've got a pretty good wide receiver 1, but we wanted to think that this offense was going to take a step back last year. Sam Darnold has a great year. And then, I just want to believe that JJ McCarthy is going to be good in this system. And back-to-back years, like wide receiver 21 wide receiver 20, missing a couple games last year. So I can understand why people push him down, and you can probably pull a bunch of advanced statistics about how he runs hot on touchdowns, and maybe that cools down. But for me, as my wide receiver 4, to be able to take advantage of some of those spike weeks, and now I have my full roster minus the tight end spot filled out. That's definitely something I'm very comfortable with. Wow. So that worked out pretty well with the tight ends. No one took a tight end there. So the gamble paid off. So this pick for me is LaPorta. The fact that I just took Jordan Addison, I'm not going to take Hawkinson here. You can make the argument for, you just get the touchdown equity, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like a 3 touchdown game to Jefferson or a 2 touchdown game to, you get what I'm saying. So I'm not going to do that. I will take LaPorta. He was disappointing last year based on where we were drafting him, but he's still a really good player, and it'll be interesting to see what that offense does without Ben Johnson. But I think at this point in the draft, to still have a top 5 tight end isn't something that I'm going to pass up. All right, now I have my full roster filled out. Right, so I've got 4 bench spots. I can really go in any different direction. I'm definitely going to walk away with 4 running backs, and I currently have 2. And I would like to get, 1 more wide receiver, maybe 2. Now, I've talked about this before where FantasyPros doesn't, I complained about this earlier where they don't take the 3rd quarterback. So I'm just not going to take a 3rd quarterback because I don't think these guys would necessarily be here. So I don't want to get too like, you'd never get like, I guess Penix, yeah, maybe. You'd never get a Penix in a 12-team Superflex league in the 10th round. Like I totally get it. I understand. I want them to fix their platform. So I talked about Njoku earlier. So that is interesting because I could have gotten him here. Now, the downside with Njoku, and I think that when we open up tight end rankings week 1, I think that Njoku is going to be ranked above LaPorta, assuming that Flacco is going to be the quarterback. Now, we don't know if Flacco is going to start the whole year. We don't know if age is going to catch up with him. He definitely wasn't as good last year as he was in Cleveland the year prior. We know that Jared Goff isn't going anywhere, so I'm okay with that here. It allows me to take a player I really like here, and I have as my wide receiver 32, and that's Jakobi Meyers. And Jakobi Meyers is just Mr. Reliable. Like, he always gets pushed down the boards, and he always finishes as a top 30 wide receiver. The last 3 years, wide receiver 23, wide receiver 24, wide receiver 28, and he led the league with 0 drops this year on 87 receptions. He averaged 73 yards per game without Devontae Adams. Jack Besh is a nice addition, but they still have 68 vacated targets at the wide receiver position, and I think Besh's addition is going to eat more into like the Trey Tucker and DJ Turner targets. And we saw Brock Bowers already be the number 1 target earner. Like, to me, Jakobi gets the upgrade at quarterback. He's always inside the top 30, and he always gets ranked outside the top 40. And when I was going through my wide receiver rankings and I pushed him up to 32, I was like, even this feels like a little bit of disrespect to him. So Meyers is like consistently always one of the easiest picks. If you've been a Jakobi owner, you know just how solid he is and how nobody ever seems to care. I feel like people are starting to catch up a little bit. I've heard more Jakobi Meyers buzz this offseason. Last offseason, that's all we talked about. We made a short about him, et cetera, et cetera. But long story short, Jakobi is the pick here. I need to take some running backs. In 12 team, we've only got 3 picks left, and I've only got 2 running backs. And, I'm confident in my 2. I'm a little bit weary because TreVeyon, like if he starts slow, that could be a big issue. So let's take a look at the running backs. So looking back at my team, maybe what I should have done is taken like Judkins or Swift over Jordan Addison, just because running back has ran out so much. And even like the last 3 rounds has been super light. So, live and learn. That's why we mock draft. It's June. But let me just start to acquire some running back pieces. Cause again, I've still got 2 running backs inside my top 20. It's not like a traditional 0 RB build. It's just kind of turned out to be a little bit weird. And again, that's kind of the nature of Superflex. Like, things get a little bit funky in the draft, but at least I know Tajay Spears is like a good player that can fill in when Pollard misses time or maybe game script. Again, not someone I'm excited about, but I will go ahead and just select him. And because we've at least seen what he can do with a decent opportunity share. So for the next pick, gonna go running back again. I will say at this point, if we're just pretending like I'm drafting right now for my actual league, I think the pick here is pretty obvious. I'm going to go with J.K. Dobbins. Now, he doesn't have a team. I hope he gets a team, and I hope he gets a good team because I've taken him in like an unhealthy amount of best ball drafts. But I touched on this earlier with Chicago. Like, I think J.K. Dobbins is a potential landing spot there. And, year over year, we see even if these guys don't have a team to start the year, people get hurt, they get signed off the couch, they have fantasy value. Like, look at Kareem Hunt last year. I think J.K. Dobbins had a lot more in the tank for the Chargers last year than Kareem Hunt necessarily did. So I want to get good players on my team late that could potentially have a path. So let's go with Dobbins here. All right, last pick of the draft. I will take a little bit more flyer. I like with my last pick to always take a player that I just really like. I think in the last draft I took Cedric Tillman. He's someone I'm going to be targeting late in a lot of drafts. But for this one, let's go with Kyle Williams, New England Patriots. He's a great separator. He was a great player in college. He has the opportunity to come in and really establish himself as what I would imagine to be the number 2 target, right? I mean, assuming Stephon Diggs comes in and is healthy, and I'm sure his coach will be fine with him. We saw what happened, but I think he has a chance to really be a good player for Drake May. And so at this point in the draft, as much as I'm tempted to grab another running back, that can always be addressed at the waiver wire. That can be addressed via trades too. So let's go ahead and take Kyle Williams here. So this one I got a B+, which I think is super fair. The last 2 I've gotten an A-, and I think for me, I don't know if I get the full analysis because I think you probably have to pay for that. I don't know. But bit of a question mark at the running back position. I will say, I love Henderson, but I can easily see how he's getting 8 to 10 touches the first half of the year, and that just doesn't work out. Mixon, I think we know what he is. I really like my wide receivers, but Marv definitely has some question marks. And, but I think with Jordan Addison as that boom bust flex, I think that's a lot of fun. Caleb, I love. Jakobi, very stable. I feel like I can, fit him into bye weeks, or if anyone else isn't performing, or even start him over Marvin Harrison some of the weeks, as sad as that is to say. Spears, a great handcuff. He's a good player. J.K. Dobbins, hopefully he signs with a good team. And then Kyle Williams, just a late round receiver that I typically like. Usually I do 6 bench, but for the purpose of this, we did 4. But I can imagine a couple of those things is what drove my grade down. But all in all, good draft. Enjoyed it and appreciate you guys for watching. If there's any draft spots that you want to see us pick from, we're going to start doing some more collab drafts, Trevor and I. So if there's any spots you want to see us pick from, or full PPR, 2 wide receiver, 2 flex, 3 wide, you name it, just let us know in the comments. We're happy to accommodate. We're going to be doing a ton of these from now until the end of August. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.